a high-flying banker whose life takes a dark turn when he's convicted for the cold-blooded murder of his wife and her lover. Andy Dufresne is handed a double life sentence and tossed into the belly of the beast, Shawshank State Penitentiary, a place notorious for being a no-exit zone where hope goes to die. Inside these walls, Andy encounters men who have spent so much time behind bars that the prison has become their only reality. They are institutionalized, so disconnected from the rapidly changing world outside that survival and freedom seems like an impossible dream. For a long time, Andy remains a ghost, drifting through the yard in total silence. That is, until he crosses paths with Red, the man who knows how to get things. Red is a veteran of the system, a lifer who has already survived 20 years of Shawshank grind. Andy approaches him with a strange request. He wants a small rock hammer and a massive poster of the legendary Hollywood siren, Rita Hayworth. Red, ever the cynic, tries to play the mentor, mocking the idea. He warns Andy that if he's planning to tunnel out with a tiny hammer, it would take him centuries to see daylight. But Andy just smiles and leaves him with a cryptic promise. You'll see what I'm doing once that hammer arrives. As their conversation unfolds, Red, ever vigilant, warns Andy about a menacing group of inmates who have their sights set on him. But Andy, seemingly unconcerned, simply reiterates his request for the rock hammer. Once the small tool is in his hands, Red privately scoffs, calculating that it would take a staggering 600 years to tunnel through the prison wall with such a tiny instrument. Andy, a connoisseur of geology, had merely stated he wanted it to carve rocks, a seemingly innocent hobby that masked a much deeper purpose. As time passes, Andy slowly integrates into the prison community, adapting to its harsh realities. However, one night, the sinister trio Red warned him about corner Andy and brutally assault him. Such an ordeal would typically leave deep psychological scars. Yet Andy endures it with an unnerving silence. His body bears the marks of the beating, but his face remains an enigma of quiet resilience. One day, a group of inmates is selected for a grueling detail, resurfacing the prison roof. Among them are Andy and Red. The man in charge is Captain Hadley, an officer who seems particularly sour and disgruntled that day. As they work, the inmates overhear Hadley venting to his colleagues about a $30,000 inheritance he just received from his late brother. However, his joy is overshadowed by the crushing realization that the government will tax most of it away, leaving him with next to nothing. In a move that shocks everyone, Andy breaks protocol and approaches the volatile Hadley. He asks a dangerously personal question. Do you trust your wife? Furious at the prisoner's insolence, Hadley snaps, screaming that his wife isn't a widow yet, and drags Andy to the very edge of the roof, threatening to throw him off. Just before he is pushed, Andy quickly explains that a man is allowed a one-time tax-free gift to a spouse of up to $60,000. Leveraging his past as a brilliant banker, Andy offers to handle all the legal paperwork for free so Hadley can keep every cent, under one condition. He asks Hadley to provide 3 cold beers for each of his co-workers on the detail. The next afternoon, the men sit on the roof, drinking suds in the sun and feeling like free men again, all thanks to Andy's daring move. A few days later, while the inmates are distracted by a movie screening, the predatory gang targets Andy once again. They corner him, attempting to blackmail and overpower him. Andy fights back with everything he has, but outnumbered 3-1, he is brutally beaten within an inch of his life and ends up in the infirmary. The leader of the attackers is thrown into solitary for a week, but justice, prison style, is waiting for him. When he finally returns to his cell, Captain Hadley is there to greet him. Hadley delivers a beating so severe and calculated that the predator is left permanently disabled, a swift and brutal stroke of karma. Soon after, Warden Samuel Norton conducts a surprise inspection of the cells. He heads straight for Andy's, searching for anything suspicious, but finding nothing incriminating. In reality, Norton has heard from Hadley about Andy's unique talents and is looking for a way to exploit them. Noticing a Bible in Andy's hand, Norton takes it, boasting about his own devotion to the scripture. Despite the prison's strict rules, Norton notices the walls are covered with movie star posters, including the stunning Rita Hayworth. He tells Andy that while such displays are technically forbidden, he's willing to look the other way for a price. Impressed by Andy's intelligence, Norton summons him and reassigns him as the assistant librarian. The library is run by Brooks, an elderly inmate who has spent a lifetime behind those walls. For years, Andy works under Brooks, but as his workload grows, largely due to his secret financial services for the guards, he eventually brings Red on as his assistant. One day, the peace is shattered when they discover Brooks holding a knife to another inmate's throat. The tragic truth? Brooks has just been granted parole. After decades in the system, he is so terrified of the outside world that he's trying to commit a fresh crime just to stay in the only home he knows. The old librarian had spent 50 years behind bars, making the prison the only real world he knew. He believed that if he committed a murder, his sentence would be extended, allowing him to stay in the safety of the walls forever. However, after a heartfelt plea from Andy and Red, Old Brooks eventually released his hostage and decided against committing another crime. When he finally stepped out of the prison gates, the outside world felt alien and terrifying. The world had changed so drastically since he entered 5 decades ago that it felt like a concrete jungle he couldn't navigate. Unable to adapt to a life of freedom that felt like a prison of its own, Brooks tragically chose to take his own life. In the next chapter, Warden Norton launches a new program at Shawshank called Inside Out, which sends inmates to work on public projects outside. Beneath the surface of this reform, the warden is actually exploiting prison labor to rake in massive amounts of dirty money through bribes and kickbacks. To launder this mountain of cash, Andy creates a phantom identity, a man who doesn't exist named Randall Stevens. He funnels all the illicit funds into accounts under this name, making the warden wealthier than ever. The beauty of the scheme? If the police ever came looking for the paper trail, they would end up chasing a ghost, a man who was never even born, leaving the investigation at a dead end. In the next scene, a young new inmate named Tommy joins the crew. Having heard whispers of Andy's legendary kindness and how he helps everyone, Tommy approaches him with a heartfelt request. He wants to earn his high school equivalency. He dreams of a better life with his wife and child once he's free, and an education is his only ticket out of a life of crime. Moved by the kid's ambition, Andy takes him under his wing and meticulously prepares him for the GED exam. One day, struck by the contrast between Andy's brilliant mind and his bleak surroundings, a curious Tommy asks Red how someone like Andy ended up in a place like Shawshank. When Red reveals that Andy is serving time for the brutal murder of his wife and her lover, Tommy is struck with his silence, so heavy it says more than words ever could. Warden Norton then summons Tommy for a private chat. The young man, naively believing the warden wants to help clear Andy's name, confirms every detail of the true killer's confession. Instead of justice, Norton orchestrates a cold-blooded execution. He lures Tommy into the yard and has him gunned down, later framing it as an attempted escape. With the only witness dead, Norton is convinced that Andy's hope is crushed and that he will remain a prisoner and a personal accountant forever. The warden later visits Andy in solitary, smugly lying that he had no choice but to kill the escaping boy. Seeing right through Norton's lies, Andy defiantly refuses to continue managing the warden's dirty money. But Norton's mask slips completely, revealing a monster. He threatens to burn Andy's library to the ground, strip away his protection from the guards, and toss him into the laundry room with the prison's most violent predators. Trapped and with no cards left to play, Andy is forced to surrender to the warden's demands once again. After 2 grueling months in solitary, Andy finally emerges, a changed man. When he asks Red if he ever thinks about getting out, Red cynically replies that the state only lets you go when you're too old and broken to remember your own name. But Andy isn't looking for parole, he's looking for freedom. He tells Red about a beautiful place in Mexico called YWN, a tiny village on the Pacific coast. He dreams of opening a small hotel, fixing up an old boat until it looks brand new, and taking his friends out to sea to spend the rest of their days fishing in the sun. Red listens to this with heavy skepticism, unable to let himself believe in such fantasies. He warns Andy that hope is a dangerous thing, a spark that can drive a man insane behind these walls. He tells Andy that Mexico is a world away and that he needs to snap back to the harsh reality of prison life. But Andy is resolute. He looks at Red and tells him that life comes down to a simple choice: get busy living or get busy dying. Before walking away, Andy asks Red for a solemn promise. He describes a specific hayfield in Buxton with a giant oak tree at the end of Stonewall. He tells Red there is a unique piece of black volcanic rock buried there with something hidden beneath it. He asks Red to promise that if he ever gets out, he will find that spot. When a confused Red asks what could possibly be under that rock, Andy simply smiles and says, "You'll just have to go there to find out." Following that final conversation, Andy heads to the warden's office to finish the books one last time, carefully stashing all the incriminating ledgers into the safe. Before he leaves, Norton barks out a final set of orders: iron his clothes and polish his shoes until they shine like glass. Andy returns to his cell, but the mood in the yard is heavy. That night, Red and the others are sick with worry, fearing that Andy has finally reached his breaking point and might be planning to take his own life. When the cell doors slide open the next morning, Andy's room remains hauntingly still. He doesn't come out. When the guards storm in to investigate, they are met with a sight that leaves them absolutely speechless. In the next office, Warden Norton opens his shoe box to change, only to find Andy's filthy, beat-up prison boots sitting where his polished shoes should be. Suddenly, the sirens scream across the yard. The unthinkable has happened. Andy Dufresne has vanished. A frantic Norton storms into Andy's cell, dragging Red along for an interrogation. He screams at Red, demanding to know where Andy went, but Red simply stares back, claiming he knows nothing. In a fit of pure, unadulterated rage, Norton begins hurling Andy's small rock collection around the room. He throws one stone at the poster of Raquel Welch, and to everyone's absolute shock, the rock doesn't bounce off. It disappears through the wall. Norton tears the poster away to reveal a massive, hand-carved tunnel hidden behind it. The entire room falls into a stunned silence. The walls are made of solid, reinforced concrete. Digging through them without heavy machinery should have been impossible. Yet, Andy had done the impossible. He was gone. The prison guards launch a massive manhunt, scouring every inch of the perimeter, but all they find are Andy's discarded prison rags, a bar of soap, and a tiny, worn-down rock hammer, the very one Red had procured for him 20 years ago. It turns out Andy had spent 2 decades painstakingly chipping away at the wall with that miniature tool. To dispose of the evidence, he had smuggled the crushed stone and dust out in his pockets, surreptitiously scattering them across the prison yard during his daily walks. On his final night working for the warden, Andy executed his masterstroke. He swapped the warden's incriminating ledgers with his own Bible before locking the safe. A clueless Norton never suspected a thing. Even more daringly, Andy had layered the warden's freshly pressed suit beneath his own prison uniform and swapped his clunky boots for the warden's polished shoes, walking right past the guards without a single soul noticing the switch. Moments after the prison lights go out, Andy crawls into the tunnel he spent 2 decades digging. Timing his movements with the roar of a violent thunderstorm, he smashes open a sewage pipe and begins a nauseating crawl toward freedom. He drags himself through 500 yards of filth, the length of 5 football fields, to emerge on the other side of the prison walls, finally free. The next morning, Andy transforms into his alter ego, Randall Stevens. Armed with the fake identification and documents he meticulously crafted over the years, he visits several banks, withdrawing every cent of the warden's laundered money. By the time he's finished, he has collected nearly $2.95 million, turning him from a fugitive into a very wealthy man. But he isn't done yet. He mails the evidence of Norton's corruption to a local newspaper, and by the next dawn, the warden's criminal empire is splashed across every front page. Back at the prison, a frantic Norton opens his safe only to find Andy's Bible waiting for him. Inside the front cover, a note from Andy reads, "Dear Warden, you were right. Salvation lies within." As Norton flips through the pages, he finds the hollowed-out silhouette of the rock hammer. Andy had been hiding the tool of his escape inside the very book the warden cherished. With the police closing in to arrest him for his crimes, the terrified warden realizes his reign is over. Unable to face the prospect of life behind his own bars, Norton chooses a coward's way out and takes his own life. Sometime later, Andy's loyal friend Red is finally granted parole, stepping into the sunlight after 40 long years. He finds himself struggling to survive in a world he no longer recognizes. He stays in the same halfway house where Brooks once lived, working a job that feels meaningless and battling the same dark urge to end it all. But a promise is a promise. Remembering his word to Andy, Red travels to the hayfield in Buxton and searches the stone wall until he finds the mysterious black rock. Tucked beneath, it is a tin box containing a stack of cash and a heartfelt letter. In the note, Andy invites him to YWN.Studio, reminding him that hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. Driven by a new sense of purpose, Red breaks his parole and heads south. He eventually arrives at the sun-drenched shores of the Pacific, where he spots Andy meticulously restoring an old boat on the beach. The two longtime friends, now free men for the first time in decades, share a silent, joyful embrace as the story draws to a close.